What's up guys, it's Amanda. Welcome back to my channel and happy Artsy Fartsy Friday. Today I am going to be talking all about Prismacolor Premier markers. You guys have probably heard the name Prismacolor before, but I feel like they're most well known for their colored pencils. I don't necessarily hear people talking about their markers all that often, especially here on YouTube. So today I am going to be taking a look at the Prismacolor Premier brush markers and letting you know my thoughts. The markers that I will be using in today's video in particular come from this primary and secondary 12 marker set, as well as a few markers that I picked up in open stock. I did have some difficulties gauging the colors online, so these are all very light pastel colors. And if you want to see how I created some art with these, you'll have to stay tuned to the demo portion of the video. The markers that I will be reviewing in particular today are the brush variety of Prismacolor Premier markers. They do come in a chisel variety as well. Both are dual-ended. The brush marker includes a brush nib on one side and a bullet nib on the other side, whereas the chisel variety has a chisel nib on one side and a bullet nib on the other. This is a little bit different because most dual-ended alcohol-based markers that I've tried have either a brush nib and a chisel nib, or a chisel nib and a bullet nib. So this whole brush nib bullet nib combo is kind of new for me, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it just takes a little bit of getting used to. Before I compare the Prismacolor markers to Copic's, I wanted to just give you a little bit more information about this marker in particular. So currently on DickBlick.com, they have the Prismacolor markers available in both open stock and in sets. This is really awesome because it allows the consumer to choose whether or not they want to invest in a larger set or buy markers individually and build up their collection more gradually. I will say it is a better value to buy the markers in a set, but I don't necessarily think that's always the most convenient thing to do. So I will be discussing a little bit of how I feel about this set, but also how I feel about the individual stock markers as well. The price for the individual open stock markers comes in at about $3.69 per marker. That is significantly cheaper than Copic's, but I would not necessarily consider these a cheap marker. They're not quite high end, they're definitely not low end, but they fall in somewhere kind of around the middle, sort of along the lines of Winsor & Newton markers and DickBlick's own brand of alcohol-based markers. If you were to buy the markers in a set, for example, like this 12 marker set here, the price per marker will be cut approximately in half, coming in at around $1.83 per marker. So you can definitely see the value of buying in a set, but again, there is a lot of conveniences to buying a Prismacolor marker in open stock. The other thing about Prismacolor is that they're a very reputable brand, and you can find them in most craft stores, including Joann Fabrics, Michaels, or Hobby Lobby. Another interesting thing to note is that the brush nib markers and the chisel nib markers are actually the same price. At least that's true on DickBlick.com. The price per chisel marker is $3.69 and the price per brush marker is $3.69 as well. There is a slight difference in the color range. The brush markers have about 196 colors, whereas the chisel markers have 200 colors. I'm not necessarily sure what the 4 colors are that aren't available in the brush variety, but I do think that that's a pretty good size range, and it definitely seems like it would be more than enough to satisfy most illustrators. The sets also come in a variety of sizes, including sets of 12, 24, 48, 72, 156, and 200. That's a mouthful. I will have more information about Prismacolor markers linked down below in case you're interested in doing your own research. I will link my resources as well as some other resources that I think might be helpful. And I will also link to where I purchased this set. Just for the sake of transparency, I am an affiliate with DickBlick.com, so any purchases made through that link will result in a small commission to me, which goes to supporting my channel. So if you do decide to purchase anything through that link, I greatly appreciate it. Now let's do a little bit of comparing. This is a Copic marker, and this is a Prismacolor. There are a lot of significant differences in terms of packaging. The Prismacolor barrel is a little bit longer. It is round as opposed to an oval shape with the Copic marker. However, they did consider all of the artists who might use drafting tables, and to prevent the marker from rolling off of your table, they do include these funny little legs on the end of each cap that sort of prevent it from rolling away, which is very nice and very thoughtful. Like I said, the marker itself is a little bit longer than Copic markers, and really the most notable difference comes from the size of the Prismacolor barrel. It's a little bit longer than the Copic marker barrel, and the caps on the Prismacolor marker are a little bit shorter. I don't necessarily think this means that the Prismacolor marker has more ink or it's a better value or anything like that. I think it's just the difference in how they've chosen to package their markers. Similar to the Copic marker, the Prismacolor marker has a brush nib. There aren't a whole lot of notable differences between the brush nibs of these two markers, except for the fact that the barrel on the Copic marker comes up a little bit higher and sort of chokes the nib a little bit higher than the Prismacolor marker, which is a little bit more exposed. It is still very stiff towards the bottom and very flexible towards the top, which is pretty typical of your Copic marker as well. I do find that the Prismacolor nibs are a little bit stiffer and less flexible, but I don't think that this is really anything negative about the marker, and could just be the fact that these are newer markers, whereas my Copic markers are a little bit more broken in. As mentioned previously, the other end of the Prismacolor marker includes a bullet nib as opposed to your traditional chisel nib. Sort of moving on from aesthetics, let's talk about some of the other key differences between these two markers. As I alluded to earlier, price is definitely a big difference. The price for Copic markers can come in at anywhere between $5 and $8 per marker. That's a significant difference from the around $3 to $4 that you would spend to get one Prismacolor marker. So I definitely think price is an important thing to consider here. That being said, Prismacolor markers are not refillable, so that is a huge downside for me in particular. Because it's not necessarily a cheap marker, I think that the fact that you would have to continually replace every marker every time you run out of ink would definitely add up over time. And so I think in the long run, Copics are the better value because you can buy the ink refills and refill your markers time and time again. So not only is that more cost effective for you, but it is more environmentally friendly. As mentioned previously, the Prismacolor brush markers are available in 196 colors. That is about half as many colors as the Copic marker range, which I believe is about 356 colors, but I don't necessarily think that's a significant problem either. I think 200 colors would be more than enough for most people, and I don't necessarily think more colors makes Copic a better brand. Now that I've sort of covered the general basis for my thoughts on the markers, I wanted to briefly go over this little resource that I have, and this will be available over on my Patreon in case you would like to download it and save it for future reference. You can. If you're familiar with my marker reviews, then you've kind of seen this same structure before. Basically, anytime I get a marker set, I like to swatch out the markers and test out their layering and blending abilities. These are all the markers available in the 12 color primary and secondary set. You can see you do get a wide range of markers, but they're all pretty different from each other, which made blending a challenge in this case. And you can see I sort of had an opposite problem here where all of these colors were a little bit too similar and there was a little bit hard to get variety in there. As far as layering goes, I don't necessarily think Prismacolors are the best marker for layering, but I don't think they're the worst either. Much like their price, they kind of fall somewhere in the middle for me. Using the brush nib felt very similar to using the Copic brush nib that I know and love. I didn't really notice any notable differences there except for the fact that it's maybe a little bit more stiff. And then the bullet nib was also very similar to bullet nibs that I've used in the past, and there wasn't really anything super notable about it except for the fact that it's just your standard bullet nib. Getting into blending, I feel like this is the part where I have the most thoughts. Blending with these markers was a challenge, and that was not something I anticipated, especially acknowledging the fact that these are brush markers and they have a brush nib. So blending really shouldn't have been too difficult. However, it was something I encountered several times, especially when trying to create this gradient here at the top. I think I was able to get it to a pretty good place, but it might have also been a challenge of having colors that were too drastically different from each other up here, and not having those transition colors in between two drastically different colors was definitely a challenge as well. So I don't necessarily fault the marker entirely for this, but it is something to consider. I don't feel like they blended as effortlessly as my Copic markers. I don't necessarily know why that is. Even when blending the colors that were more similar, I can still see streaks and lines of demarcation that indicate it's not a perfectly smooth blend. I don't know if this is a difference in their ink formula or the paper that I was using. It's a little bit hard for me to tell, so I'm still trying to work that out for myself. Then going into my little tests here, they're very similar to Copic markers in that when you layer a lighter color over a darker color, the lighter color tends to sort of pick up and erase the darker color, which is a really cool way to create different patterns and effects. And when I tested using the colorless blender fluid with the Prismacolor markers, I was a little underwhelmed. I don't necessarily think it was able to penetrate the ink as well as other marker brands, but this is also another indication that it might be a slightly different ink formula than Copic markers, which means the Copic marker colorless blender just did not react in the same way with the Prismacolor markers. So again, I will have this resource available for you to download over on my Patreon in case you were interested, but let's get into the demo portion of the video. So for the demo portion of this video, I'm going to be creating 3 different illustrations. I'll be putting the reference picture for each illustration up on the screen so you can see what I was looking at, but the reference pictures that I chose sort of had different color schemes, which I thought would challenge me to use these markers to their fullest potential and try different color combinations as well. The goal of this was to push me towards using more limited color palettes and really testing the blendability of these markers. So this first illustration is a reference of a portrait, and I picked this reference picture in particular because it was very pastel, had a lot of pink undertones, and that really fit well with the open stock markers that I selected that were all very light, sort of pinky mauve tones. One of the challenges that I anticipated with these markers was that they were all going to be very similar and that it was going to be hard to build up contrast. So I was actually really happy with the end result of this illustration, and I do feel like I was able to capture a fair amount of shadows and light with these colors. It was also a challenge for me because I don't tend to use super light colors in my work. I definitely lean more towards midtones, and I don't usually play so much with lights and darks in my artwork, but it is something I am trying to do more of, so I think this little exercise was really helpful. For the second illustration, I went even further out of my comfort zone. I was going to be playing a lot with high contrast in this piece, and I was really going to be pushing the types of colors that I was going to be using. The 12 marker set that I picked up really did not have any neutrals or earth tones, and so it was a really big challenge for me to step outside of my comfort zone and just play with color. I found a reference picture that really had a lot of contrast between blues and oranges, and I really loved that. When I first swatched out the 12 markers from the primary and secondary color set, I had a very sunset-y feeling from it, and I wanted to really play with the contrast between warm and cool colors and complementary colors. I can't decide at the end of this if I like the finished illustration here or not. I really love the different colors that I used, and I think that they play really nicely together. But I don't necessarily think I nailed the approach yet, and it's something I would like to revisit actually, and I may even continue to do more experiments like this one with the Prismacolor markers, because this was actually a lot of fun. And like I said, at the end of it all, I really love the colors. I just don't know if I nailed the execution just yet. For the third and final illustration to demo these markers, I did a much more monochromatic piece. I really wanted to play around with still capturing contrast and light and dark while working within a same color family. This was probably the hardest one for me to do because I was just really worried about the colors blending together and not looking contrasted enough, and for it all to just sort of get washed out. That being said, it was probably my favorite of the 3 sketches, and I really had a lot of fun with this one. I don't know which is my favorite at the end of the day. You'll have to let me know what your thoughts are down below, but let me give you my final thoughts on the Prismacolor Premier markers. So just to recap, this was the illustration I made with just the open stock markers that I had selected. I was actually really happy at how well the colors built, and I think they blended better here than they did in my swatch sheet, which I was pleasantly surprised by. I'm really happy to report that I like this end illustration, and I think that the colors played really, really nicely together, which at the end of the day is the most important part of working with alcohol-based markers. If they don't blend, they don't work. And these actually blended better than I had anticipated. For the second illustration, I used only the colors available in the 12 marker set. I used 7 colors in total, and I'm really happy with the way that I was able to blend these colors together as well. Obviously, my approach in this illustration was a little bit more painterly and expressive, so there are still some blending lines and streaks that aren't perfectly smoothed out. But in this case, I actually think it works, and I think using these markers to conceptualize an idea and lay down color really quickly is sort of what they're meant for, and I've inferred that also through their marketing and packaging images sort of being geared towards drafting and design and fashion illustration, and not necessarily full color, you know, cartoon, and not necessarily the full color sort of illustrations that I do typically. However, I was really happy with this set overall as well, and if you're looking to get an artist in your life a very basic starter set of markers, I think this would be a really good one. That being said, there are mostly midtones in this set, and there's not a whole lot of ways to blend very smooth gradients, so just something to be mindful of, but overall I think this is a very good set. And the last illustration featured sort of a combination of the set and the individual stock markers that I purchased. And I was a little bit skeptical about how well these colors were going to play together, but ultimately I'm very pleased with the result. I like this illustration quite a lot. Let me know down below what you think your favorite is. But as far as my conclusion for the Prismacolor markers, I don't think any of you will be surprised to know that I liked these markers, but they're not going to be replacing my Copics. The fact that they're not refillable is always the biggest downside for me, because I want to be able to use a marker over and over and over again without worrying that it's going to run out of ink and that I'm going to have to go out and buy a brand new marker. It's just not convenient for me. While these are widely available both in-store and online, I just don't see why marker brands don't make refills. Especially at this price point, I think Prismacolor is a reputable brand. They're a high-end enough brand to supply artists with refills. So until they integrate refills into their line of art supplies, I will probably not be using these markers regularly. That being said, I think they're a very fun tool to use in my sketchbooks, and I'll probably be using them in the same way I did in this video, to accent sketches and add a little bit of color and make my artwork pop off the page a little bit more. I think these are a great marker for that. I just don't necessarily know if you want to spend $3.69 per marker to do this. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I respect your decision either way, and I think ultimately it's up to personal preference. However, if you were considering buying these markers and you're not quite sure if you're ready for Copics, I think these are a great place to start. You're going to spend about half the money that you would on a Copic marker, and you can really get a feel for if you like the quality of Prismacolor. If you like the quality of Prismacolor, I guarantee you'll like the quality of Copic markers as well. That basically concludes my thoughts for today. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more art supply reviews, be sure to subscribe, thumbs up this video, and comment down below what you would like to see next. But until then, take care, and I will see you on the internet. Bye guys!